Hello friends, welcome back to VOWIAS. Welcome to the Prelims test series discussion. This is test 7 of Prelims and this is part 1 where we will discuss the first set of questions. Right. So before we begin, small information. The document that we are using for the discussion is the Prelims test series summary document that VOWIAS has prepared. This summary document will ensure that we cover the entire 50-60 pages of the explanation in just 10 to 12 pages. This will make things easy for you during the revision. So to make the best use of it, if you want to subscribe, you can just contact us using the email ID that is given in the description, right? And also you can comment as well. Now let us start the discussion. Let us look at the first question. The first question is about the market intervention scheme. So the market intervention scheme, if you see it, this is basically to protect the growers of the commodities from making distressed sale in the event of bumper crop, because if you see the agricultural commodities, their price is determined by the demand and supply. So when the demand is constant and when the supply is more, the prices will fall. Demand is same and the supply is more, so the prices will fall. So during this time, the farmers tend to sell all the produce in a very less price, so that is not remunerative for them. So what the government will do is the government will intervene and government will ensure that the farmers don't sell their produce at a distressed price. That is called as market intervention scheme. It covers both perishable and horticulture commodities. So this is basically for the protection of the farmers during a bumper year. That means sometimes the crops will grow very well. So during those years, as the supply increases, the government tries to protect them. When there is at least 10% increase in the production or 10% decrease in the ruling rates over the previous year. During these two conditions, government will intervene. Under this market intervention scheme, predetermined quantity at fixed market price intervention is procured by the NAFED, which is a central agency. And if you see, so this is basically approved on the request of the state or union territories. If they are ready to bear 50% of the loss, 25% in case of northeast states, if any of the loss is incurred during the implementation. The funds are not directly allocated to the states. This is about the market intervention scheme. Next, the second question is on the budget. So Article 112 talks about the budget. It talks about the annual financial statement. That is, it comprises of revenue budget and capital budget. The revenue budget consists of revenue receipts of the government, right? And this includes the tax revenues and revenues like interest and dividends on the installments made by the government, the fee and other receipts for the services rendered by the government, and expenditure met from these revenue. And this revenue expenditure, it do not create any asset. That is the reason if we have more revenue deficit, then that is not good for us. The government is also, we have this FRBM commission, even they suggested for the gradual reduction of this revenue deficit. And on the other hand, the revenue deficit here, if you see, it is incurred for normal function. That means the revenue expenditure what the government will do. This is basically for the day-to-day functioning of the government. So like the pensions, salaries, all these things are dependent on it. Next, the capital expenditure. Capital expenditure means the expenditure incurred for the building of assets. And this includes investment by the government that yields profit or dividends in future. That means a lot of investments will be done by the government for the profits. So also the government will give a lot of loans to other parties where they will pay the interest yearly and also they will return the loan after a certain amount of time. So that is called as capital expenditure. So the purchase of new weapons like missiles, jets and submarines, they require extensive capital investment. 1/3 of the government of India's capital expenditure go into defense for the weapon purchases especially. Rafale jets even come under this capital expenditure. So as we all know, the Rafale was purchased from France. It's a French company. Next, the third question is about the statutory liquidity ratio, SLR. So SLR, if you see, this is the proportion of total deposits that the commercial banks need to keep in the liquid form. They use this money to purchase the government securities. It is a tool for controlling liquidity in the domestic market. So a certain portion of the deposits that a bank will receive has to be kept in the liquid form that is determined by the Reserve Bank of India. On the other hand, we have another rate called the marginal standing facility. So this marginal standing facility is the rate at which a scheduled bank can borrow funds overnight from RBI against the government securities during acute cash shortage or shortage of liquidity. The MSF, being a penal rate, is always fixed above the repo rate. MSF represents upper band of the interest corridor with the repo rate at the middle and reverse repo at the lower band. So see, generally the banks will take loans from the RBI. But sometimes if you see, let's say 19 rupees have to be kept out of 100 rupees as the SLR. So if this is breached, if the bank doesn't have any more cushion and they have to spend from this 19 rupees, then the bank will borrow at the MSF rate, the marginal standing facility rate from the RBI. Okay, so for this they will use the bonds and all which are purchased using this SLR, and then they will use them as a collateral. Next, the fourth question is on the Bretton Woods institutions. Bretton Woods institutions means the World Bank and IMF. Both of them combinedly, they are called as the Bretton Woods institution, set up by 43 countries in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, USA in July 1944 to help rebuild the shattered post-war economic scenario and also to promote international economic cooperation. World Bank is the largest financer which provides loans and grants to the governments of low and middle income countries for the capital projects. The headquarters is in Washington DC. On the other hand, we have IMF, whose headquarters is also in Washington DC. It has 190 members, and this IMF basically it works to ensure that there is global stability in the economic sphere. So the aim is working to foster global monetary cooperation, secure financial stability, facilitate international trade, promote high employment and sustainable economic growth, and reduce poverty all around the globe. Next, the fourth one, WTO. WTO is the body that facilitates international trade, headquarters at Geneva. So this will ensure that the rules for the trade are formed and they are followed by the countries. Next, you have the World Economic Forum with headquarters at Geneva. So it's an international non-government and lobbying organization based in Cologne, Geneva. Right. Next, the fifth question is on unorganized sector. So unorganized sector, if you see, this is the enterprise that is owned by individual or self-employed workers, and not more than 10 workers are part of it, are employed in it. The National Commission for Enterprise in Unorganized Sectors has defined this. The Central Statistical Organization use the organized enterprise as small unit with 10 or more workers with the power, or 20 or more workers without power for the manufacturing sector. So broadly, if you see the CSO definition, it says that an unorganized sector is that company which has 10 or more workers with the power. An organized enterprise. Organized enterprise means it should have 10 or more workers and also it should have power. But if it don't have power, then the company should have 20 or more workers. That is the basic difference. So this is about organized and unorganized sector. So remember these definitions. This is important. Next, the Web 5.0. So this question was also asked in the recent UPSC. You can just go through the PYQs. You will get it. Former Twitter CEO Jack Dorsey announced a vision for the Web 5.0 to return ownership of data and identity of individuals. The Web 1.0 is the first generation of the global digital communication network, the read-only internet made of static web pages that allow passive engagement. Next, Web 2.0 is about read and write internet. The World Wide Web that we use today is part of this Web 2.0. Next, Web 3.0 is the next generation of internet, the read write execute web. With decentralization, it is actually driven by this artificial intelligence and machine learning. Next, we have the Web 4.0, which talks about autonomous content exploring, self-learning and content generating agents based on matured semantic and reasoning tech plus AI. Example, the services interacting with the sensors and implants, the NLS services, the natural language services or virtual reality services. All of them are part of this Web 4.0. Next, we have Web 5.0, that is building extra decentralized web that puts you in the control of your data and identity. Web 5.0 and Web 2.0 plus Web 3.0 will allow the users to own their identity on the internet and control their data. Both Web 3.0 and Web 5.0 envision an internet without the threat of censorship from the government or technology and significant outages. So just remember these things: 5.0, 4.0. Okay, so 5.0 means decentralized one, because I think Web 5.0 was asked in the exam. Web 4.0 is about autonomous content exploring. 3.0 is about read, write and execute once, right? All these things. Next, WTO subsidies. WTO is the World Trade Organization, which works to increase the world trade and to ensure that there is fairness in the trade. So WTO basically stops the countries to provide subsidies which are impacting the world trade. So based on this, there are various types of boxes. Subsidies are placed in these boxes according to their role in the trade. So WTO subsidies are identified by boxes with the colors of traffic lights, the green, amber and red. Amber box subsidies are the domestic support measures that are considered to distort production and trade. These amber box subsidies impact the trade. They will reduce the trade, and it includes the measures to support prices, subsidies with respect to production quantities. Next, you have the green box. Green box, if you see in the annexure 2 of the agricultural agreement, these subsidies, they do not distort any trade and also cause minimum distortion overall. They should be government funded and must not involve price support. These programs, they are not targeted at particular products and include direct income support for farmers and not related to the current production levels. Example, the environment protection and regional development programs. Green box subsidies are allowed without limits provided they comply with the policy with specific criteria. The PDS, basically the public distribution system, it does not come under green box. Next, you have the blue box. Blue box is nothing but amber box with certain conditions, that is called as blue box. They are designed to reduce the distortion, that is the only thing, because the amber box, they are distorting the trade. So this blue box was introduced so that the governments can find the loopholes and they can reduce some distortion so that there will be no restrictions on the governments. Any support in the amber box is placed in blue box if the supports requires the farmers to limit production. At present, there are no limits on spending on the blue box subsidies. Next, the 8th question is on internal debt. Article 292 says that the government can borrow amounts specified by the parliament from time to time. And Article 293 says that the state governments can borrow only from internal sources, but if they want to take from any external source, they have to take permission from the central government. State government incur internal debt only, right? The 12th Finance Commission said that the states can access to external financing for various projects if it is facilitated by the Government of India, because the Government of India will be providing the sovereign guarantee for these borrowings. In India, if you see, the total Government of India liabilities are in these three categories broadly: the debt, the external debt and public account liabilities. That means the internal debt, external debt and public account liabilities. The public debt, if you see, it includes both internal as well as external debt. That means the money that is taken by the government internally, that means from the banks and the people, and also externally, that is from the international organizations and other countries. Both of them combinedly is called public debt. The instruments covered under the internal debt are dated securities. Primarily, these are the bonds that are issued by the government. Next, the T-bills. These are the zero coupon securities issued at discount and redeemed at par, and these are short-term receipts. So the dated securities are for long-term, medium and long-term, whereas T-bills are for short-term. So generally the T-bills are for 91 days, 182 days and 364 days. So they are for very short-term, right? You also have the 14-day treasury bills as well. The securities means the bonds, they are also issued to the international financial institutions like the IMF, IBRD, IDA and so on. And these securities are issued against small savings. And you also have the market stabilization scheme, where the government by MOU between the government and RBI can borrow from RBI, because under these bonds the government will give these bonds to the RBI and borrow money from RBI, while the proceeds from such borrowings are maintained in a separate cash account with the latter, and that means with the RBI, and is used for redemption of T-bills and the dated securities which are raised under this scheme. And also you have the gross external debt. So gross external debt means the total outstanding debt with other countries, with the foreign countries. Next also you have the long term and short term debts. Long term means, so they are further classified into multilateral debt, the bilateral debt, Okay, that means multilateral means with more countries, bilateral means only between two countries. You have the export credits, the commercial borrowings, NRA deposits, rupee debt, all of them come under this long-term debts. Whereas short-term debts, if you see, the trade credits, which is for about 6 months, the foreign institutional investors, the T-bills, corporate securities, all of them are part of this short-term. Next, the ninth question is about bank rate. So, bank rate is that rate which on which the central bank lends money to the commercial banks by buying eligible securities, the bills of exchange or the commercial papers. So generally, the banks will purchase the bonds of the government. These bonds later can be used by the banks to take money from the central bank, that means from the RBI. So the RBI is lending money by taking these bonds. An increase in the bank rate results in increase in the cost of the credit. So when the cost of the credit increases, that means the interest rate at which the banks are borrowing from RBI increases, then the people also have to take loan at higher interest rate. So because of this, what will happen when the interest rates are high? When the interest rates are high, the borrowing of the people decreases. Borrowing, that means people will take less money, people will borrow less money. So the money availability in the market also reduces. But if the government want to increase the money in the market, then they will reduce the interest rate. So when the interest rates are less, then people will borrow more. So when the people will borrow more, they will have more money to spend. So that means more money is available in the economy. Okay. Next, the currency deposit ratio, CDR. Currency deposit ratio is the ratio of money held by the public in currency to that they hold in the bank deposits. That means the currency with the public compared to that of the money which is there in the bank deposits. That is called as currency deposit ratio. It reflects people's preference for liquidity. Example, if the cash deposit ratio increases, then that means the people are spending more, because if you see generally in the festive season, people tend to spend more. People tend to spend more as people convert these deposits to the cash balance for extra expenditures like the goods, small goods and all. That is the idea that we will get with this CDR, currency deposit ratio. Next, the 11th question is about Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management FRBM Act of 2003. So the main aim of this FRBM, the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management, is to ensure intergenerational equity in the fiscal management, and also to ensure that there is long-term macroeconomic stability and there is better coordination between fiscal and monetary policy and transparency in the fiscal operation of the government. So what does this mean is basically this is to ensure that the liability of today's loans will not be there on the future generations, because all the money that we are taking today, all the loans that we are taking today has to be repaid sometime. That means the future has to repay the loans that we take today. So in order to ensure that this is in control, the government has brought in this FRBM Act of 2003. It is mandatory for the government to take measures to reduce the fiscal deficit and eliminate the revenue deficit and generate revenue surplus. That means if you see the capital assets, they in fact create some assets and they will generate revenue. But the revenue expenditure in fact doesn't generate any revenue. So the revenue deficit is seen as something that will waste money. So eliminating this revenue deficit is the target of the government. And also this FRBM prohibits the borrowings of the government from the RBI. It bans the purchase of primary issues of the Government of India securities by the RBI after 2006. It prevents monetization of government deficits. That means when there is deficit, then RBI will come and put money over there. That is called as monetization of deficit. It needs the government to lay off 3 policy statements in each fiscal year. That is medium-term policy framework, medium-term fiscal policy statement, the fiscal policy strategy statement, and macroeconomic framework policy statement. These 3 are laid in the parliament every year. You have to remember these 3. Next, it is amended by the Finance Act of 2012. In addition to 3 documents, the Government of India shall lay the medium-term expenditure framework statement also along with these 3. Also for the effective revenue deficit, the difference between revenue deficit and grants for capital creation and capital asset, which helps in reducing the consumption component of revenue deficit and makes space for increasing capital spending, is done. Next, the 12th question is on the special drawing rates, the SDRs. Special drawing rates for SDR, if you see, this is nothing but an international reserve asset. It is created by IMF in 1969. This is basically to supplement its members' official reserves, because the reserves which are there with the countries, they are not sufficient on some days. So during that time, they can use this special drawing rights. It's a value based on 5 currencies. Remember these 5 currencies: the dollar of US, the euro, the renminbi, the Japanese yen, and the British pound. So this was there right from the time of the European Union. Though now the UK came out of this, it is not because of that UK's pound is considered as part of this SDR. But the importance that the UK holds is the reason for keeping this pound in the SDR. The SDR value in dollar is determined daily based on the spot exchange rates observed at noon in the London time. IMF has the authority to prescribe other SDR holders, non-members, members that are not part of the SDR department participants. The SDRs cannot be held by private entities or individuals. Only the governments can have them. Next, the 13th question is on the National Sample Survey Organization, the NSSO. It gives 3 different estimates of employment and unemployment based on different approaches or reference periods. This is basically to classify an individual activity status. They are the usual status approach. So this actually is used for the reference period of 365 days, the year preceding the date of survey of NSSO for measuring unemployment. It records only those persons as unemployed who has no gainful work for major time during 365 days preceding the date of survey. It captures long-term unemployment. It fails to capture the short-term unemployment that is the major issue. The CWS or current weekly status measures the short-term fluctuations, but it has the reference period of a week. The current weekly status uses 7 days preceding to the date of survey as the reference period. The person is considered to be employed if he or she pursues any one or more of these gainful activities for at least 1 hour of any day of a reference week. And the current daily status is nothing but it seeks to ascertain the activity status of the individual for each day of the reference week. Every day they have to have. Next, the 14th question is on National Green Tribunals, the NGT and HCS. So, HCS means the High Courts, NGT and High Courts. So, tribunals are set up under the Constitution and Acts of Parliament or State Legislature. The High Courts consist of judicial members only, but if you see these tribunals, they consist of both judicial plus administrative, because these are the expert panels that requires specialist members who are from the administrative field, because only the judiciary cannot understand all the nuances of these environmental things or any other fields, because we have these tribunals for environment, administration and all. The tribunals are limited to the laws under which they are set, while the High Courts have the power to use enacted laws in making a decision. So the High Court has broader powers compared to that of these tribunals. Next, the 15th question is on the local area banks, the LABs. Some private banks, if you see, they have these low-cost structures operating in rural and semi-urban areas comprising of 3 contiguous districts. The local area banks are to enable the mobilization of rural savings by rural institutions and investments in local areas. Since the local area banks are set up in district, the activities are focused on local customers, leading to agriculture and allied activities, the small-scale industries and non-farm sector. The local area banks must observe priority sector lending targets at 40% of the net bank credit, just like other banks like the scheduled commercial bank. These banks will adhere to the lending of 25 sector of their priority sector deployment, 10% of the NBC to the weaker sections. In 2014, RBI permitted the local area banks to convert into small finance bank as well. This is about the local area banks. So, local area banks are the small private banks, low cost structures operating in rural and semi-urban areas. But the thing is that they have to be in 3 districts. Next, the 16th question is on e-Vidhan. e-Vidhan is the mission mode project to digitize and make functioning of state legislature paperless. And e-Vidhan is part of the Digital India, and the Ministry of Parliamentary Affairs is the nodal ministry. The NIVA is the workflow system developed by NIC Cloud Meghraj that helps the chair and the members to carry out their duties in the House and to conduct the legislative business in the paperless manner. NIVA will eliminate all the process of sending out notices, request for collection of data. This is about the e-Vidhan and NIVA. Next, OIC and GCC, Organization for Islamic Cooperation and Gulf Cooperation Council. So the UAE actually contributed about $277 billion, and it makes India's, it makes a, it made India as the, in fact this UAE is the largest, one of the largest trading partner of India. Saudi Arabia was the next with 153 billion. India's dependence on the Gulf countries especially is basically for the oil needs. We need their oil, that is the major thing for India. India depends on the Gulf countries for its energy needs. The share of Gulf of India's total crude oil imports, if you see, it remained stable over the past 15 years at 60%. In 2020-21, India's top exporter was Iraq with a share of 22% and followed by Saudi Arabia with a share of 18%. UAE, Kuwait, Oman were other Gulf countries among the top 10 suppliers of crude oil. So the Gulf Cooperation Council, if you see, so the Bahrain, Oman, Qatar, Kuwait and Saudi, they are part of this Gulf Cooperation Council. Next, the 18th question is again on the union budget. We just have discussed this union budget, but here the deficits are given. Fiscal deficit. Fiscal deficit is the gap between the government's expenditure and receipts. Total expenditure and total receipts. The difference between them is the fiscal deficit. That means this fiscal deficit, the government has to borrow from the market or even from RPI. This is called fiscal deficit. And you have the gross primary deficit, which is nothing but gross fiscal deficit minus net interest liabilities. Gross fiscal deficit minus net interest liabilities. And the net primary deficit, if you see, it is nothing but the net fiscal deficit minus the interest payments. Net fiscal deficit minus the interest payment, that is interest paid minus interest received. A shrinking primary deficit indicates progress towards fiscal health. Because the primary deficit, it does not include the interest rate. That means all the other debts, all the other wastage, they can be seen primarily with this gross primary deficit. Effective revenue deficit is introduced in the budget 2011-12. It is the difference between revenue deficit and the grants that are given for the creation of capital assets. That is called as effective revenue deficit. It signifies the amount of capital receipts that are being used for the actual consumption and expenditure of the government. The 19th question is on Sant Tukaram. Sant Tukaram is a 17th century Marathi poet and Hindu saint. He worshipped the famous deity of Vishnu known as Vittala in Pandapur in Maharashtra. He was part of Vaishnava tradition Dasakuta. His works are central to Warkari sect across Maharashtra. Next, the 20th question is on the nuclear weapon control regime, the multilateral export control regimes. So it is a voluntary and non-binding agreement to prevent and regulate transfer of military and dual-use technology. It's independent of UN and their regulations applies only to the members and is not obligatory for a country to join it. India is a member of 3 of the 4 MECRs except the NSG. Next, the Wassenaar arrangement. Wassenaar arrangement, if you see, its secretariat is in Vienna. It's a voluntary export control regime set up in July 1996. It has 42 members, and if you see the dual-use goods, they should be used in fact for useful purposes and not for military. India was inducted into this on 7th of December 2017 as the 42nd member. And you have the NSG, the nuclear supply group. India wants to be part of this nuclear supply group. This group seeks to contribute to the non-proliferation of nuclear weapons via 2 sets of guidelines for the nuclear exports and nuclear related exports. It came into being as a response to the 1974 nuclear tests done by India, and that was known as the Operation Smiling Buddha. You have the Australia Group. Australia Group is the informal association of the states. This is to minimize the risk of proliferation of the chemical and biological weapons. Australia Group is for chemical and biological weapons, and it was set up in 1985 after the Iraq's war, and where Iraq has used the chemical weapons. India joined this group on 19th of January 2018. Next is the MTCR, Missile Technology Control Regime. It is an informal political understanding between the states that seek to limit the proliferation of missiles and missile technology. Formed in 1987 by the G7 countries, it is not legally binding. India was inducted in 2016 as the 35th member. Next is the expenditure method of calculating GDP. Calculation of GDP has various methods like income method, expenditure method and all. Expenditure method, if you see, it talks about the expenditure done by all the people. So it includes the formula basically, if you see, GDP by expenditure method is CIG X minus M. C is the consumption by the households. I is the investment expenditure by both the government and the private. Next, G is this is by the private. G is the government expenditure on the defense and non-defense, like the weaponry, healthcare, education and all. And X minus M is the net exports. Net exports, that means export minus import. So this is how the GDP is calculated by the expenditure method. Next, the World Bank Group. World Bank Group consists of 5 institutions. First is the IBRD, International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. It's the world's largest development bank, provides financial products and also the policy advice to the countries to reduce their poverty and extend benefits of sustainable growth. Next, you have the International Development Association, the IDA. It was set up in 1960 and the aim is to reduce poverty by bringing zero to low interest loans and grants for the programs that boost economic growth and also decrease the inequalities and improve people's lives. Next is the International Finance Corporation, IFC. This is to advance the economy's development and the growth of private sector in the developing countries. So it will push the developing countries to invest in these developing countries. So the private companies should invest in these developing countries for the development of the countries. So this is guaranteed by this International Finance Corporation. Next, you have the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency. This promotes the FDI into developing countries and support the growth. So both this IFC and Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, they are for the investments. One is for FDI and other is for the advancement of this private sector in the developing countries. Next, you have the International Center for Settlement of Investment Disputes. This is devoted to the international investment dispute settlement because investments will be done in all these countries and there might be a lot of disputes between the governments and these companies. They will be discussed by this International Center for Settlement of Investments and Disputes. Next, the 23rd question is again on GDP. GDP is the measure of aggregate production of final goods and services. All the final goods and services which are produced within a territory, that means within a country, they are calculated, and the people here can be both local as well as foreigners. So if you see, that's why the US GDP is very large because it has both locals and foreigners, right? Even in India, if you see, the GDP consists of both the Indians as well as the foreigners who are earning and living in India. It comprises of those two things. The goods and services produced by the foreign nationals within a territory is also part of GDP, but only the final output of such goods and services are included to avoid double or triple counting of raw materials. Because if you see, if you even consider even the middle processes like the fabrication of any steel or anything, then the final output consists, or you can say the total calculation will even, or it will duplicate the things. But if we calculate only the final cost of or final output cost, then this final output cost will already consider all the input cost. So all these input costs also will be part of this final cost. So that's why we are only calculating this final cost. Next, the 24th question is on Green Revolution. Green Revolution is basically introduced. It was led by MS Swaminathan. This is regarding the usage of these high yielding variety of seeds to increase the food grains cultivation, to increase the output of the food grains in the country. It also requires the use of fertilizers and pesticides and also reliable irrigation has to be there. So the first phase it was taken up in the mid 1960s up to mid 1970s. The high yielding variety seeds was restricted to affluent states like Punjab, Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu. Economist C.H. Hanumantrao said that the good proportion of rice and wheat produced in Green Revolution are available as marketed surplus and were sold by the farmers in the market. Thus, the price of the food grains declined relative to other items of consumption. The government provided loans at low interest rate to the small farmers and subsidized fertilizers so that even small farmers could have access to these inputs. Next, the 25th question is on GDP deflator. So GDP deflator, if you see, it is the measure of inflation. It is one of the important measure of inflation, and the GDP deflator is nothing but the nominal GDP by real GDP into 100, N by R into 100. Now, what is nominal GDP? What is real GDP? Nominal GDP, if you see, the market value of all goods and services produced within a country in that year. So it is unadjusted for inflation. But real GDP, if you see, the nominal GDP adjusted for inflation. That means considering the prices of goods which are produced in this year at the base year price. That means we will take a year which is much more stable, and all the goods which are produced in this year are The prices of these goods are taken as the prices which are available or which are present in the base year. Okay, so that we can actually compare what is the increase of price. Let's say a good A, the cost of this good A is 100 rupees today. 5 years back, the cost of this good A is 90 rupees. Okay, 5 years back it is 90 rupees, today it is 100 rupees. So the nominal price, this 100 rupees will become the nominal price because it is normal in this year. But the real price will be 90 because we have taken this year, 5 years before, that year as the base year, and that base year actually will be considered for the calculation of this good which is produced in this year. So this will give us this will tell us what is the increase in the price. So this 100 by 90 will tell us into 100, it will actually give us the real idea about the inflation, because see here this is cancelled, so the ratio will be more than 1. That means there is increase in the price of the goods. The GDP deflator reflects the prices of all domestic produced goods and services in an economy, whereas CPI and WPI are based on limited baskets of goods and services and they don't represent entire economy. CPI includes price of goods consumed by the representative customer, and it includes prices of imported goods. GDP deflator does not include prices of imported goods. The weights are constant in CPI, but they differ as per production level of each good in GDP deflator. And the changes in consumption patterns or introduction of new goods and services or structural transformation are automatically reflected in the deflator, which is not the case with other measures. WPI and CPI are measured on monthly basis, whereas GDP deflator comes with a year lag, with a lag of year or quarterly. Generally, quarterly GDP estimates are given. During that time, we will get the GDP deflator also. So that is the reason actually the GDP deflator is not much use, because the WPA and CPA every month we are getting. So as they are more frequent, they help in understanding the economy in real time. But the GDP deflator comes once in a quarter, so it's difficult to get the clear picture of the economy, right? So these are the questions for the day, guys. We'll meet again tomorrow with the next set of questions. Till then, keep studying and stay tuned. Jai Hind.